to everyone just joining us. I'm just going to start to go through house rules while you all come in. So, welcome to this masterclass on the SQE pathway with BPP. We are delighted to be running this session for you. We hope you'll find this masterclass informative and get involved in the conversation by submitting your questions throughout. I'm going to pass over to Johnny from BPP in just a moment, but before we kick off, I just wanted to go over a couple of house rules. So first and foremost, please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and I will be sending them to Johnny throughout the presentation. But the earlier you send in your questions, the more likely you are to get a response. Please don't send them in within the last minute of a masterclass. Please also use the chat tool to let us know if you have any audio or visual problems during the masterclass, and we will do our best to resolve those for you. Please note that the masterclass is being recorded, and a recording of this session will be sent to all registrants after the session, and it will be available on our YouTube channel very shortly. Please feel free to post about the masterclass on social media using hashtag LCM Masterclass. And finally, we have lots more masterclasses coming up. We have a practice area masterclass on energy next week, and BPP will also be returning with a masterclass on the SQE and social mobility. The links to both of these masterclasses will be in today's follow-up email. Okay, so just before I hand over to Johnny, what I want to do is find out where you are all at in your legal journey. So I'm going to launch a poll and just give you a few seconds to fill that out. Let us know what stage you are at, and that just helps Johnny maybe tailor the content a little bit more to you. Just going to give you guys another few seconds to fill that out, and then I will get on with sharing the results. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Brilliant, thank you for that. I'm just going to share the results of that. So a couple of sixth form students, well done guys, really great to have you here. First year students, again, so good to hit you to be keen this early, and then second, third year and other. Okay, which I'm assuming is postgrad. I'll just hide that. Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. Johnny, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you so much, Neve, and it's a pleasure to be here doing a session for you guys on your platform. We do a number of SQE webinars every year because unfortunately the whole subject of the SQE is one that's incredibly complicated, and when we run these sessions there's always a wide variety of knowledge in the room. So there'll be some people with a huge amount of knowledge that are just coming on to find out a little bit more, and there are others that are coming to the SQE for the first time. So please be patient with those students who may ask questions that you know the answer to, because there'll be some probably that you don't know the answer to. And I'll just echo what Neve says, get your questions in early. If I don't answer them immediately, it's not because I don't want to, it's because I'm either going to cover them later on or I'll cover them at the end. But certainly the earlier you get your questions in, the better. But maybe give it a few minutes just to see what we're covering, because the chances are a lot of the stuff that you're wanting me to cover, I will do. So a little bit about me before we start. I'm Johnny Hurst. I'm the head of outreach and a senior lecturer at BPP University Law School. Been here for over 15 years. Before that, I was a partner in a city firm specialising in commercial property. I'm regarded to be one of the sort of national SQE experts. I run my own SQE YouTube channel called SQE TV. Please do check it out. It contains lots of really helpful stuff. It's an independent channel of BPP and any other provider that tells you sort of stuff straight. And I'm going to tell you stuff straight here today about the SQE. Yes, I'm representing BPP today, but really I'm giving you information from a really very neutral perspective so that you can go to your SQE journey and make decisions from an informed perspective. We've done a lot of market research lately, and we can see that students are actually choosing SQE providers, I would say, without properly fully researching their SQE options. So one of the things, and what's great about you being here today, is that clearly you are serious about researching your SQE options, and you hopefully will be taken to the next level by all the information we'll give you here today. For those of you who don't know who I work for, BPP University Law School is regarded to be one of, if not the leading law school for postgraduate legal education, certainly because of the really uncomparable ties that we have with a number of the international firms. We exclusively act for 4 of the 5 Magic Circle firms, many of the Silver Circle firms. If you see the number of firms that send all their trainees to us, you'll see from the list that's rolling up the screen, we really are in very, very good company. And if you come to BPP as a student, you'll be studying alongside students, not just from these firms, but for students who want to go to the smallest firm in the land, to mid-sized firms, to niche firms, to working in-house as well. When we design our courses, we make sure that we take into account students who want to go to all aspects of practice, not just the big city firms, which obviously we're known for. We have hundreds of students who want to be family lawyers, employment lawyers, personal injury lawyers, and so on. So what I'm giving you is really advice for anybody who wants to go and qualify to be a solicitor, whether you want to go to the city, whether you want to be an employment lawyer, a family lawyer, a music lawyer, work for a local authority, work for an NGO or a charity or whatever. All pathways lead to the same way. And the first thing I'm going to do is to sort of explain to you, well, what is the pathway to qualification, because it is a little bit confusing. And there's a diagram I'm going to sort of explain to you here and break it down sort of step by step. So what's the pathway to qualifying as a solicitor in England and Wales via the SQE, the Solicitors Qualifying Examination? Well, you need to have a degree or an equivalent, it says in the rules, to be able to progress and take the SQE. We'll talk about whether or not you can just go and take the SQE exams without having any sort of law qualification beforehand in a moment. But the rules are you can take the SQE just by having a degree or something equivalent to that. And then you take on the SQE assessments themselves. There are 2 assessments, although there are lots of mini assessments within each of the 2 stages, SQE1 and SQE2. SQE1, which we'll see in a moment, is a multiple choice assessment set across 2 days. SQE2 is 16 different skills-based assessments, and generally speaking, you have to pass the multiple choice questions in SQE1 before you can get to SQE2. You also need to complete 2 years worth of qualifying work experience. In old money or old terms, we used to call this a training contract under the old legal practice course route. In fact, the term a training contract is still used when referring to 2 years qualifying work experience with a law firm under the SQE regime. It's just a useful, helpful terminology, but you can do qualifying work experience and spread it like a portfolio across multiple providers now. So you could do 6 months at one law firm, a year at a charity, 6 months working for a local government department, or a combination of all sorts. Up to 4 employers, you can aggregate your qualifying work experience. So it's now much easier to qualify if you pass the exams. That's the big if. If you pass the exams, it's much easier to qualify because it's easier to accrue the 2 years work experience you need to qualify as a solicitor. And the great news is it includes paralegal work. It includes work that is undertaken overseas, not necessarily dealing with law in an English jurisdiction, provided that you can get the work you're doing signed off by an English or Welsh qualified lawyer. That's the big if. So the type of work you do is much more varied. You have to be working or given the opportunity to work towards what are called solicitor competencies when you're doing qualifying work experience. So just doing admin or just doing the photocopying or answering the phone is not going to be qualifying work experience. You have to be doing something that traditionally a trainee solicitor would have done under the old regime in general terms. So qualifying work experience you need to complete, and then subject to you passing a satisfactory character and suitability test, you are qualified as a solicitor. You don't have to take a physical test. It's just a question of declaring any previous convictions or anything that the SRA might consider you not to be suitable for, and them doing checks on you for all sorts of reasons as well at the point of your application for admission. Now, the key thing about this pathway, apart from the order in which you take those SQE exams, you have to pass SQE1 before you can take SQE2, and the fact that you need a degree or equivalent to start the SQE journey, you can actually do the SQE exams and the qualifying work experience in any sort of order at all. And this is something that a lot of students don't appreciate. So you could go straight from university into a paralegal role and start to accrue at some stage, once you've got up to the right sort of level, qualifying work experience before you've even looked at any SQE textbook or gone into an SQE classroom. Or you could go straight into an SQE course, which many students do straight after they graduate, or maybe after they've done a conversion course, and complete your SQE exams before you start your qualifying work experience. You can do it alongside each other. So a lot of students we teach at BPP do our part-time SQE course. It has the advantage of you being able to learn and earn at the same time. So you'll do the course roughly over twice the period, but the great thing is you'll be able to learn and finance your course whilst you're doing so. And yeah, many of our students are in full-time employment, and if you're very organized, you can make that work. So there are many, many ways you can actually qualify as a solicitor down this pathway. Many ways you can actually study and prepare and qualify in terms of the actual work experience as well. And what I'm going to show you now are the graduate route pathways to qualify as a solicitor. And just to show you how varied they are, just to explain this in a bit more detail, and hopefully these pictures will make sense. So what we said was that you need a degree or we would say a conversion course to actually start any course at BPP. The SRA's rules say you just need a degree or equivalent to start an SQE course, but we would recommend anybody who's really serious about their careers not to think they can just wing it straight onto an SQE course if a provider allows you to. I think it's irresponsible for providers just to lure people in with a promise that, yeah, we can convert you to be the equivalent of an LLB student in the matter of weeks. That's simply not going to happen. You're going to be undercooked, and there's a huge amount of underlying law that you need to take forward from your law degree or your conversion course into the SQE, which is why we and other responsible providers are saying you need to have a law degree or a good graduate conversion course, law conversion course, PGDL, before you start an SQE course. So one lesson I would say to you now is we're not just trying to flog courses to people for the sake of it. You will succeed better. Your chances of getting a pass and enhancing your grade on the SQE is going to be so much greater if you do a proper preparation course, and if you're a non-lawyer, you do a proper conversion course before you start your preparation course. But let's assume you've got your law degree or you completed a PGDL or a law conversion course. What happens next? Well, there are many options. There's minimum 2 to 3 years to qualify from here, and I'll explain why there's a discrepancy in that in the moment. Let's look at one route now, which is what we would call the SQE route 1. There's a little code in terms of the color coding on the top right hand corner there. So you could go straight on and do the SQE assessments after having done a prep course. So go straight from university, do a prep course at a place like BPP, take your SQE exams, and then once you completed your SQE exams, you could then complete your qualifying work experience, that 2 years that we've just mentioned, and then you're qualified as a solicitor. And this is the very linear, traditional route that students would have taken under the LPC. If you're a full-time student, you want to carry on your education, get that continuity of learning. One of the advantages of this route, of course, is the fact that because you need to carry forward a lot of the learning from your law degree, it's quite important that you do the SQE pretty soon after you've finished your degree. It was helpful to, for one reason alone, and that's because you'll retain so much more the sooner you do your SQE exams. The reason for that is you get tested on tort, you get tested on contract, you get tested on constitutional administrative law, public law, and lots of other subjects like equity and trust, land law and criminal as well. So all those subjects you would have studied in your law degree, the longer you leave it to start your SQE course, the harder it will be to get back on board with that stuff that you might have learned even 2 or 3 years ago. Particularly as a first year, many people would have done contracts. So a lot of students like this route because it's a linear pathway. It keeps you on the education journey, and you're relatively fresh from your studies from university to be able to tackle the course. But it's not everybody's cup of tea. And a lot of people will decide to go on the second SQE route, so the lighter brown route here. So instead of going straight onto an SQE course, they could do what I suggested earlier, straight after your law degree, or maybe after you've done a conversion course. You go into practice, maybe as a paralegal, and you could start to accrue qualifying work experience at some stage, sometimes not immediately, because the standard you're at in terms of the knowledge you're at and the experience you have might not necessarily be immediately transferable into qualifying work experience, but within 3 to 6 months you're probably at the level of work where you're given the opportunity to develop those core solicitor competencies to qualify as a solicitor and translate this work experience into qualifying work experience. A lot of students find this really useful for a number of reasons to do this second SQE route, because it helps to finance your SQE studies if you don't get sponsored. It's also a way, if your firm you're working for or the company you're working for, if they are sponsoring students regularly to train with them on their SQE training pathway, it gives you an opportunity to show yourself in the shop window and maybe be recruited through their recruitment, and therefore they might end up paying for your studies when the time comes for the SQE. So good reason to delay would be to build up a little bit of money, because it's a very expensive route to go down the SQE route and self-finance, whichever way you do it. So building up a bit of a pot of money at the meantime, getting some experience, making sure you're sure that the law is for you is probably not a bad idea. But of course, the longer you leave it, the less recent your studies of things like tort and contract and equity and trusts and land law and everything else is that will be assessed in the SQE. So you need to sort of get a balance and don't leave it too late. And then, of course, once you've done your QWE, or maybe even whilst you're doing your QWE, you could be doing your SQE assessment. So as a part-time student, you could be doing it alongside it, but maybe you could do your full 2 years QWE and then spend a year as a full-time SQE student. It's really up to you how you do it. It's really within your gift to decide when you drop in the SQE. And of course, what you can do is to break up the SQE studies. You could do a year's worth of qualifying work experience and then do SQE1 and then do another year back in practice to do your second year of QWE and then do the SQE2 assessments. There's no right or wrong way to do it. That way it helps you with your cash flow if you break it up that way. But you probably end up paying a little bit more for some courses, because if you buy a package course together, then you're likely to get a discount from your provider. Certainly BPP, if you buy all the studies together, you'll obviously get a discount for that. So those are the two main routes. However, there is a new route to qualification that's relatively new that many people aren't aware of and are put off by the name. And I would say, for goodness sake, take this route as seriously as all the other ones. And it's this one. It's called the graduate apprenticeship route, or the graduate entry apprenticeship route. Now, what this is an opportunity for you to go straight into practice from your degree. So not going into a paralegal role, which would be route 2, but going straight into practice as an apprentice and as a graduate solicitor apprentice. And this is a way that you can be sponsored and get your fees paid for your studies and also for the assessments. So yeah, a really good way to make sure that you don't have to save up an awful lot of money to get you through the assessments if you can get yourself an apprenticeship. And this is a real game changer, because it's not just big firms that are offering this. There are small firms, there are local authorities offering it, small companies, big companies are offering this opportunity where they've got in-house legal departments and they're wanting to bring along people to qualify. You know, companies like BPP, for example, we employ an in-house legal department, and yeah, certainly the graduate apprenticeship route would be something I'm sure that we will be entertaining very, very shortly for people joining us at that level. In fact, we've got solicitor apprentices who are 18-year-old school leavers who joined us for a 6-year apprentice. They're already joining us on a 6-year apprenticeship route. So this is something that we and other employers who've got in-house legal departments are looking to recruit future trainees on. And the big advantage of this, of course, as well as the financial side of things in that the firm covers you, is that you're getting great practical experience at a good level whilst you are studying. Because what happens with most graduate solicitor apprenticeships is that you learn and earn at the same time. What you probably in the most cases are doing is working for 4 days a week in the law firm or the employer, and you're working for 1 day as like a day release student. So you're going to college or either attending classes face-to-face or online at the provider that your employer decides to contract with. BPP, we have hundreds and hundreds of legal employers that send their apprentices to us now. So this is a very real option. It's a slight alternative to being sponsored in the orthodox way. The sponsored in the orthodox way would look more like the first route we looked at here, where firms that, you know, one of the big magic circle firms, many of the firms I showed you on the screen right at the beginning of this session that send their trainees to BPP, send them to do their SQE first, just do that as full-time students, and then they move to the firm to do their 2-year training contract, which is a form of qualifying work experience, and then they qualify that way. But this alternative route, the graduate apprenticeship route, is one that is growing in popularity and is still the equivalent of a sponsored training contract. Don't think of it as something inferior because it's got the word apprenticeship in it. We had to do an awful lot of work, in fairness, with law firms to educate them and say, you might not like the word apprenticeship because it might suggest something that you think downgrades the quality of the training and the role you're doing. If you can get over that, ultimately it's the same as a training contract, and that's what it is. And at qualification, you'll be seen in no worse position than anyone else because you'll be a qualified solicitor, having worked probably at a very good organisation that's given you some great training. So once you've completed your graduate apprenticeship, which normally lasts 2.5 years, so it's about 2.5 years for the graduate apprenticeship, because within that time you're studying and you're doing the training as well. So it takes a little bit longer than the 2 years qualifying work experience to get through the whole of the process. But then eventually you are qualified, after taking your SQE, and you qualify that way. So these routes will range from 2 to 3 years as a full-time student, depending on how you do them, but you can stretch it longer than that, particularly if you're wanting to study part-time and work maybe not in practice whilst you're studying for the SQE part-time. Sometimes people prefer to do it that way. Right, I'm going to pause there just in case there are any questions, and I'm sure Neve will punt them into the chat if there are. I'm also going to show you something that is only applicable to anybody who's a current third-year LLB graduate or a recent law graduate, or somebody who started their law journey as a graduate converter in 2021, which is unlikely. So if you're a first or a second year at the moment, or you're a non-law student, this route doesn't apply to you. And it's the old LPC route, because what's happening is that the LPC is fast becoming obsolete. We at BPP are taking our last intake in September 2024 because we believe no other provider is validated to deliver LPCs beyond September 2024. But this is still applicable to anybody who's looking to start an LPC going down the old route. It's not something I would recommend to anybody unless you've got an LPC training contract in the bag, with one caveat. But let me just show you what this route is. So if you're a third year LLB student at the moment, you're going to graduate this summer. If you've got an LPC training contract offer, then you might well consider the LPC as an option. You have to pass the LPC and complete a 2-year training contract. But just to reiterate, this is not applicable to anybody who is a first year or second year LLB student, or anybody who is a non-law undergraduate who hasn't started their law journey yet. But that is the route to qualification down the LPC route. The only caveat I would say is the LPC, you should only really be thinking it if you've got an LPC training contract in the bag. Why? Because the currency of LPC training contracts has rapidly diminished. There are very few of them left. And therefore, if you pass the LPC and can't get an old style training contract, what are your options? Well, the only option to qualify would be to do effectively go down the transitional arrangements, and that is to effectively, although you get exempt from SQE1, you'd still have to pass SQE2, which is quite demanding for the reasons we'll say in a moment. So generally speaking, anybody should be thinking of doing the SQE as a default position. But if you feel that you've got strong reasons to do the LPC, like you've got a training contract in the bag already and they're happy to give you an LPC training contract, that's one good reason to do the LPC. The other example might be for a number of people in the neurodiverse community, they are very fearful, with due cause, that multiple choice questions are not going to show them in their best light. And I don't mean somebody who just doesn't get on with multiple choice questions. I mean somebody who's got a diagnosed neurodiverse condition where they are at a disadvantage because the medical evidence says the way that they or you think is different to the way that other people think when they're processing multiple choice questions, in which case the LPC might be a preferable route. But everybody else, the default position really should be the SQE now, because that really is now bedded down. We're now in the third year of this particular pathway to qualification. So there we are, lots of different ways that you can qualify, but ultimately all pathways are equal. Getting qualified is important, but how you qualify, how you pass the SQE is really important as well. So what I'm going to move on to now is to talk about what the SQE is, and then talk about, well, how do you go about researching the right types of courses, which of course LawCareersNet have got fantastic resources there for. So I always recommend, and I do recommend to my students, start at LawCareersNet. They're a great resource for investigating all the different types of courses that are around, as well as looking at different types of law firms and employers. But what is the SQE? Well, in a nutshell, it is the pathway to qualify as a solicitor, the new route that came in 2021. It consists of two parts, SQE1 and SQE2, and I'm going to show you SQE1 now. Now, remember earlier I said this was the multiple choice papers that you need to take as part of SQE1, and there are two papers, and I'm just going to show you what these papers consist of. The first half of the syllabus, they call it FLK, Functioning Legal Knowledge, but the first half of the SQE syllabus consists of stuff you would have covered either on a law degree or your conversion course. So as you can see, and I mentioned earlier, contracts and tort, the legal system of England and Wales, constitutional administrative law, EU law, legal services, land law, trusts, and criminal law. All stuff that anybody would have done on a law degree or a graduate conversion course like the PGDL. That's one of the reasons why I say don't think you can just walk onto an SQE and do in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks a conversion course. You will be fooling yourself, even if somebody else thinks they can fool you to taking their course. Frankly, I wouldn't want you operating on me if you walk straight into a 4th year of a medical degree, having done a Mickey Mouse for 4-week clinical conversion course. There isn't one, but if there was, I would be thinking, well, I don't want you operating on me. Similarly, I wouldn't want you giving me legal advice off the back of a very, very quick crash course on legal conversion. Why do you think LLBs take 2 to 3 years to complete? Well, it's because they're challenging. They're also very in depth in terms of the subject matter that they cover. And you need to be thinking about these issues for a while. They need to germinate, and just doing a crash course isn't going to get you as prepared for really challenging assessments like the SQE unless you've done a course over a longer period of time that goes into all these core subjects in much more detail. So graduate converters, law converters, non-lawyers, really think seriously about your options before you take the SQE and make sure you do, I would say, a conversion course. We at BPP do offer a conversion course that's combined with SQE1 preparation as a master's, which is a great way to fund it, amongst other things. Let's assume you got your law degree or your conversion course. What else do you study to get you ready for SQE1? Well, all these subjects in black you can now see on the screen. These will be new to most candidates when you go to study the SQE. So business law, dispute resolution, property law, wills, criminal practice, solicitors' accounts, and wills. You'll see that the actual syllabus is very narrow. There's very little specialist practice areas. I mentioned earlier, family law, employment law. We train hundreds of family law, employment lawyers, criminal lawyers at BPP, but there's only criminal law that for typical general practice high street firms that really is covered here, and wills. But stuff like family law, employment law is not on the SQE syllabus, nor is corporate commercial law or any other specialist practice area. But these are really, really challenging modules because they're very in depth, and they'll certainly take all your time up in your preparation. So don't think it's going to be a walk in the park, far from it. So these are two papers. How are they set? Well, set as multiple choice questions. You get 5 options for each question, and there are 360 questions across the two papers. And the way it works out is that in 1 week, you'll do paper 1 on one day, and you'll do 90 questions in the morning and 90 in the afternoon. And you'll have 2 hours 33 minutes for the 90 questions, which ends up being 1 minute 42 seconds on average you have to answer each question. So you need to be really, really agile in dancing between property and land law if you're doing paper 2, or contract and tort and dispute resolution and business. The question will be randomized across the paper, so you need to be really well prepped and be able to jump literally from subject to subject, topic to topic. And you won't get the subjects in chunks. They literally will be randomized across the paper. So all the more reason to make sure you're really, really well prepared. They're closed book exams. They're centralized exams set by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. So this is very different to the old legal practice course or your university degrees, which are set by your universities. So for the SQE, you'll go to a provider typically to prepare you for the exams, but we don't set the endpoint assessments. The regulator, the SRA, does through their chosen provider, who are called Kaplan. So the SQE paper 1, SQE 1, these two papers, they're incredibly challenging. The pass rate we'll talk about a little bit in a few moments' time, but they are not great in terms of the pass rate. So we do need to give a health warning about that. But these are very, very challenging just because they are multiple different practice areas and topics. You get 5 options, and the MCQs, the multiple choice questions, are assessed on a single best answer basis. So what does that mean? Well, single best answer basis means that all 5 answers are plausible in some shape or form. It's just one answer is objectively better than the other. And that makes the questions all the more challenging, because actually when you look at the answers, they could all be right unless you really drill down to the weeds of the fact pattern and work out the nuances that the question is going to turn on. So they are very challenging, all the more reason to make sure you're very well prepared and you go to a good reputable provider that's got a very good track record, good pass rates, because the resit fees, as we'll see in a moment, are very, very expensive. Okay, that's SQE1. If you pass SQE1, you can then move on to SQE2, which is this. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the assessment of your skills. So SQE1 was primarily testing you on what we call your functioning legal knowledge, testing you on key practice areas and key areas of black letter law, as we call it. SQE2, half of the marks are for testing you on one of those skills that you can see on the screen, whether it's interviewing, advocacy, case and matter analysis, research, legal writing, and legal drafting. And there are 16 mini assessments. They call them stations because you literally go from one to the other during 3 days worth of assessments when you sit SQE2. And they're very challenging in the sense that it's quite intense, the whole experience on a day, because you'll do 3 or 4 of these in a day. And it's also important to emphasize that only 50% of the mark is for the skill you can see on the screen. The other 50% of the mark for SQE2 is for the underlying law that was assessed in SQE1. So, for example, if you look at the first example of oral skills on the top left, client interviewing and attendance note writing, when it comes to the marks, you will be partly marked in terms of how good your actual advice is. So how well do you know the law and practice? Did you give the right sort of advice or not? So giving the right advice, that's about getting the black letter law right, but how you run the interview in terms of structure it, how you are in a manner with your client, you have good client rapport, for example, all that sort of thing, your presentation skills, but also how well did you structure your attendance note? That would also be assessed as well in terms of the skill about drafting and writing an attendance note. So, excuse me, it's often underestimated how difficult and challenging SQE2 is, because half of it is still retaining the knowledge from SQE1. Okay, I'm just going to pause there, just let that sit there. So that's the SQE1 and the SQE2 assessments. Remember, you have to pass SQE1 to be able to sit SQE2. The only exception to that is LPC graduates, if they want to cross-qualify effectively down the transitional provisions, if they can't get an LPC training contract, LPC graduates are exempt from SQE1, but would still have to pass SQE2. And here's the thing, if you're an LPC graduate having to pass SQE2, you won't have done an SQE1 prep course, and therefore you won't have that recent underlying law really under your belt. You'll have it in your degree several years ago, or your conversion course, and also in your LPC, but ultimately you'll have to go over a lot of that underlying law to be really ready to do SQE2, as well as obviously do an SQE2 preparation course. Now, there are a whole range of courses out there, which we'll talk about in a moment, but before we do, let's just talk about the assessment fees as well, because I mentioned resit fees. Well, the resit fees are the same as the assessment fees, and these are charged not by BPP or anyone else who does a preparation course. These are centrally set exams, and therefore the SRAs provide a cap plan, charge these fees, and you pay these separately and over and above any test preparation course you might do. So here's what they are. Sharp intake of breath, because they're not inexpensive, and this is before you've paid a penny for any preparation course. So SQE1 costs just under £1,800. It's £899 per paper. So if you resit, if you pass SQE1, the first paper, but the second paper you don't pass, you pay £899 to resit that second paper. If you have to resit them both, you have to pay the full fee again. And SQE2 is £2,766. It's more expensive because it's quite intense in terms of the number of assessors that are required, because it's very much on a one-to-one basis that you're assessed in each of these skills. Also, the way that you're assessed is different in that I mentioned there were 16 different mini assessments. it's all or nothing. So if you don't pass SQE2 overall, you can't bank any part of it you pass like you can in SQE1. You have to resit the whole of SQE2 again if you fail SQE2. And that means you have to repay that quite sizable fee of £2,766. Remember, these fees are fees you pay just to sit the exams, and they come to a total of £4,564. I have been pressing the SRA, and I've been pressing other influential stakeholders in the profession that we need to do something to create funds of money to help people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds to help to afford to pay for these centralised exam fees. Because although BPP do fantastic things and other providers do offer scholarships as well, the missing piece in the jigsaw is the fact that neither the SRA, the Law Society, or any charities offering any sizable bursaries for people who are simply not able to afford the fees. And this is something that works against social mobility. And we'll talk a lot about this in the next session that we're going to run for you. So check that out when we run that with LawCareersNet very shortly. So those are the assessment fees. They're separate to any course fee you pay. And unfortunately, if you fail the whole of either of those assessments, you have to pay the same fee again. I'm going to give you a bit of a timeline now, just to give you an example of what it looks like in terms of your journey to qualification. And this is the timeline which would be a typical one for a full-time student. So if you were to start your typical SQE1 preparation course at the beginning of an academic year, say in September 2024, when would you sit the assessments and when would you go into work experience if you were just doing all of your SQE in one go before you started your qualifying work experience? So what would that look like? Well, if you start your SQE test prep course in September 24 as a full-time student, pretty much every provider is channeling these students into the January sit for SQE1. There are only 2 sits of SQE1 per year. So as a full-time student, it makes sense that if we start in September, we have you ready for the January assessments, and pretty much all full-time courses have you ready in that time. What happens next? Well, if you pass SQE1, of course, you can then end up going to sit SQE2. A lot of integrated courses like we do at BPP, diplomas and masters, will move you on to your SQE2 preparation before you got your mark for SQE1, because you want to make use of the intervening time for obvious reasons. You have to wait several weeks for the results for SQE1 to come through. They take 6 to 8 weeks to come through. So you then move on. And just to say that, as I said, the results come through in the March, so 6 or 8 weeks later, by which time, if you've done an integrated course with your SQE2 preparation, you're part of the way through that, because certainly for us, we start our SQE2 prep course in February 25 in that full-time example that you've got there. But not every provider does it the same way. There are different ways to do it. And of course, you can just commit to doing SQE1 if you want to at BPP and other providers as well. But if you do an integrated course, we would start your SQE2 prep shortly after you've finished your SQE1 assessments. You get your SQE1 results. And then obviously, if you've passed SQE1, you then sit SQE2 at the first time of asking, if you was to start in September with us, and you start and sit in April or May of 2025. So that's one way that you can get through your SQE journey, and then obviously you can then move on to do your qualifying work experience. These are full-time timelines. These don't work for people who are in employment, who are working pretty much a full-time week. It will take roughly twice as long to get through the whole process, is what I'm going to say. You get your results for SQE2 in, it takes about 3 or 4 months to come through, unfortunately. So you won't get them until August, September 25. So you can see this is pretty much a whole academic year that it takes for you to go through the whole of the SQE learning journey. And that really will apply wherever you go. You can't complete the learning cycle really any quicker than 12 months because of the fact that you have to do and pass SQE1 before you take SQE2. But it will take an academic year to get through. Slightly variation on this. So option 2 is you could do your course in September. You could sit SQE1 as a full-time student in the January, but you might decide to wait for your results before you start to do your SQE2 prep, in which case you could start your preparation. We would have a prep course starting in the July and have you ready for the October-November sit of the SQE2 assessments. That obviously gives you the advantage of having the ability to complete your teaching or start your teaching after you've got your SQE1 results. So this will suit somebody who wants to disaggregate their SQE1 from their SQE2 and sort of hedge their bets in that way. Those results come out in sort of March, April 25. So it would take slightly longer for you to go through that journey. But of course, there would be an intervening time in the middle there where you could be doing some work before you do your SQE2 studies. And that can help cash flow for all sorts of reasons. Okay. I think what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end, because I've got quite a few more things to get through before we go and take some questions with Neve. Pass rates. This is a really important subject for students, and I'm afraid you have not been well served by a number of providers who have not published pass rates at all, or are publishing pass rates that leave you asking more questions about the number they're giving you and how they got their number. So frankly, it's a bit of a mess. And the reason why pass rates aren't publicly known in any consistent way is unfortunately that the SRA, the regulator, have chosen not to publish any pass rates up to date. They've not even shared the pass rates with providers like BPP of how our students are doing. So all providers are having to ask their students, well, how did you do? Tell us your results. And therefore, it's caused a lot of anxiety in the student circles in terms of, well, does this provider have any pass rates? Some providers are privately telling people pass rates on the phone, but they're not publishing it on their website or their marketing literature, which begs the question, why are they not publishing pass rates on their websites? Is it because they're not confident about them? I would say that could be the only conclusion. If they're just whispering them to you on the phone because you've asked the question. So really look at pass rates really, really carefully, particularly over the next 12 months. I think it's going to change because the SRA have said they're going to be releasing more information to providers. That's fairly fresh news in the last week or so. But don't hold your breath, because unfortunately the SRA have promised granular information about pass rates between providers by the end of last year, and it didn't happen. But I'm more hopeful that we'll get something during the course of this year that will allow people to compare more accurately between providers. But for your information, what is the pass rate? Because it's important to know, even if you don't know for sure how individual providers are doing, what's the national pass rate? Well, when we look at a year ago in the January 2023 SIT, the national pass rate was just over 50%, 51% if you sat SQE1. It was 54% if you were a first-time sitter. For the July 2023 SIT, it was a little bit higher than that, but still in the mid-50s for a first-time sitter. So it's only just over a coin flip, which shows you how challenging the SQE assessments are. All the more reason for making sure that you go to a provider that you can be confident that they're actually going to prepare you well to pass. And what better way than see what their pass rates are? But then some providers are not telling you what their pass rates are. So how can you have confidence in them, I suppose, is what I'm saying. So what are pass rates at BPP? You're probably thinking, well, I've said that people aren't being transparent, but we are, I'm pleased to say. We have a pass rate that is unequaled by any other provider across all cohorts, where we've assessed the results of over 85% of the students. We had a very large cohort sit the SQE in January 2023, and 73% of our students passed, or over 73% it was actually passed, and this is way above, over 20% above the national pass rate. And we believe it's a really positive indictment of what we do and the quality of the course that we do, and a reflection on our students' hard work as well. But it just shows that there must be a massive discrepancy between providers if that is what our pass rate is showing across all cohorts. We're not cherry picking cohorts here, and we're not saying, putting a big asterisk at the end and qualifying our number, which I know other providers have done, which makes their number completely meaningless to be able to compare with anyone else's. The only transparent, honest way to do pass rate declaration like this is to say our pass rate across all cohorts is X, no qualifications, and that should be the benchmark for pass rates going forward until the SRA share their data. But that is not what providers are all saying at the moment, so really look carefully at that. Indeed, there are some providers that know their results because they embed the SQE results in the awards their masters and the diplomas they give their students, but they're not declaring their pass rates. You have to ask them, why is that the case? They've got an answer, I'm sure they have. They'll probably tell you what their pass rates are privately, and then you should say, well, why aren't you publishing it publicly? I don't know. You need to ask them. Our students are also doing fantastically well when it comes to the results they're getting as well. They're not just passing, they're passing in really, really high marks. So they're in the top, 2/3 of our students are in the top 2 quintiles, the top 40% of students passing the exam. So that just is, again, shows you do a good product, you get a good grade, it's worth investing in that because it's going to get you where you need to get to quicker. SQE2 pass rates are much higher for one very obvious reason. You've got to pass SQE1 before you do SQE2 in most cases, so therefore generally you are going to see a much higher pass rate. National pass rate for April was 77%, 80% for first sitters, and for us it was 97%. And again, we're 20% above the average, and again in July, again 20% above the national pass rate at BPP. Again, across all cohorts, no qualifications. We surveyed our students, those were the results we got. And obviously we're very proud of those. Now, bit of audience participation now towards the end of the session. If I could ask Neve to come back on, and if you could help me with a little poll we're going to do. What percentage, folks, do you believe students, or what's the percentage fail rate of students who have a first class degree for SQE1? So we're going to give you a multiple choice question. We'll just give you sort of 20 or 30 seconds. Neve, just let me know when we've had a sizable response, and then we'll see what people.
No problem. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds. Get up
Fantastic.
to 80%.
Okay, everyone vote. Don't worry, you're not going to be judged whether you get it right or wrong, because it's really interesting in terms of just to share this information with you.
You got those results up?
Oh, I just need to scroll down, don't I? Sorry, I'm scrolling down. I can't see. Sorry, could you share me what the percentage is?
Yeah, of course,
Sorry,
no problem. So 7% of people have said that it's 12%. Oh no, sorry. 12% of people have said 7%. 28% have said 17%. 50% of people have said 27%, and 10 have gone for 37%.
Really interesting. Thanks so much for that. We could return to the main screen now. That'd be great. Really interesting. Well, interestingly, the majority of you, 50%, got it right. The people, the percentage fail rate of people with first class degrees is around about 27%. You might look at it the other way around and say, well, 73% for those who got a first, but actually a first class degree is a very good sign of academic historical success, yet 27% of those people with first have failed. It just shows how rigorous and challenging the SQE assessments are, even for those with the best academic records, and therefore not to be complacent, not to cut corners, to give yourself the best opportunity. And if that best opportunity means working for a little bit longer to finance you to do the course that you really want to do and perhaps ought to do, then do so. It's not a race to get qualified, and I tell this to students all the time. Most of you watching this session are going to be recent university students or currently studying at university. You in particular have got a career of 30, 35 years at least ahead of you. What's another 6 or 12 months of maybe going out to the job market, earning some money to save enough to do the course that might be more expensive that gets you a better chance of passing? Anyway, I'll leave that with you. Thanks very much for sharing that, Neve. Just towards the end of the session now, I'm just going to share you another couple of stats for you. What percentage of SQE candidates will resit at least once? So we haven't got a poll for this, but bearing in mind the pass rate is only just above 50% for SQE1, you won't be surprised to see that in the research I've done, that 56% of candidates will need a resit somewhere down the line. And what that means when you're budgeting for your SQE, you need to take into account not just the cost of your provider, not just the cost that $4,564 for sitting the assessments, but 56% of the people in this room today are likely to have to pay at least one resit fee. So that's at least probably another minimum 899, and of course you could have multiple resits on top of that. So you can sit each assessment up to 3 times. But again, you've just got to bear that in mind in terms of your cash flow planning, because unfortunately there is a high fail rate given what the pass rates are. Okay, choosing a prep course is the last thing I wanted to talk to you about. We've talked about it's really important to do a prep course that prepares you well for the assessments, and there are loads of different factors that people will take into account. We've done loads of research on this, and we're fully aware that probably one of the most, if not the most important factors to a lot of candidates is cost. I can only afford so much, is what a lot of students say. Sometimes I will say you can only afford so much if you start straight away, but is that your best option? Is your best option maybe to save a little bit more over a period of time and then maybe apply and then do the course that you feel is best suited to you? Or are you saying, I want to start straight away and I need to do the cheapest course? There are other options. It's not a race, as I've said. So don't necessarily go for the cheapest course that necessarily doesn't have the best pass rates. Also think about funding options as well. Funding is really important, particularly if you're a domestic student, because you can get access to over £12,000 worth of master's funding from the Student Loans Company. And that will finance the vast majority of a master's course. So paradoxically, it can be actually more affordable to do a more expensive master's course than it can be to do a cheaper test prep course that might cost half the price, but you've got to find all the cash now, or all the cash over 12 months. So it's something that, to bear in mind. Sometimes the more expensive master's courses give you the better option to start almost immediately, if not immediately, because of the master's funding available. The types of assessments, when you're choosing a prep course, think about how well you're being prepared for those different assessments. At any decent provider, you'll be given lots of practice with multiple choice questions. Some test providers provide you with an exam under exam conditions, proper exam conditions, rather than just buying it for something from a glorified app. They really put you through the process of sitting in exam conditions, and that can make a difference in terms of practice tests, rather than just turning up to the SQE exams without having done enough practice tests. So the types of assessments and practice assessments that you do as part of your course should be something you take into account. The preference of law firms, many students like the idea of going to places where the courses are aligned to the work that law firms do, particularly if you do one of the master's courses. They give you a lot of specialist additional learning in family law or private client, that sort of thing, or corporate law, and so on. So law firms go to particular providers like BPP because they like the fact that we've got a family law option for those who are going into general practice, or they like the fact that we've got a corporate option for those going into the city, and so on. The reputation of the provider. Think about, how long has this person or this provider been in the market for selling law firm products? They're not all the same. How long have they been teaching lawyers in England and Wales, qualifying as solicitors? There are relatively few providers that have actually been doing that, but there are a lot more SQE providers who've literally just started in the last few years. So take that into account as well. The data on providers at the moment, there is nothing centralized, so you'll need to check with what each provider is saying about pass rates in particular, but look at that critically, particularly if, are you comparing apples with apples in terms of what people are actually declaring about pass rates. Also look at two factors here. Are you considering preparation for your career, or are you considering preparation just to pass the SQE? And again, market research has shown us that people go into two camps. One want to do an all-encompassing course like one of BPP's master's courses that doesn't just prepare you for the SQE. Once you've done all the SQE stuff, there's an extra term to do some specialist training, which will help you when you get into practice and give you that specialist area. Obviously, that's more expensive than cheaper test prep courses where people just want to get over the line for the SQE. I think the latter is very much a short-term decision from students that a lot of them will live to regret, because they'll find out going against a glass ceiling where they don't have that practice background or that practice knowledge that they could have got had they done a little bit of extra learning in one of the other courses. So think carefully before you just do a pure test prep course that is very narrow in its scope. So training contract and work experience, think about when you're thinking about your journey and the provider you're going to. Does it help you get maybe a training contract because of the association that the providers like BPP have with a number of the very biggest law firms in the land? We've got great connections with the firms that are offering graduate apprenticeships as well as the smallest firms in the land. Do they give you good support with qualifying work experience in terms of having really good careers departments like established providers like BPP have got? Think about timing. because that can be an issue. Time might be an issue for you to pass, but as I say, don't think about it as a race. I think timing should be a secondary factor. I think other factors should be more important in your consideration. And if you're working in practice already, obviously your decisions will be partly influenced by the limited time you've got and the range of part-time flexible options that are open. And there are many. Some providers are just known for doing flexible options, and there are many providers that offer all options, including BPP. We've got lots of flexible options there, as well as the face-to-face teaching options as well. Okay, I'm not going to show you this, but finally, I'm just going to show you, funding your SQE. This slide here is one that a lot of students are obviously very concerned about. I'm just going to leave that there with you, and obviously you can study that when you watch the video back in your own time. But for example, at BPP, we offer bursaries, we offer scholarships. The Student Loans Company offers, as we work around this diagram here, £12,000 worth of master's funding. There are banks that will lend privately. Sponsorship from law firms, of course, is the best way to get yourself funded or to get an apprenticeship. Part-time study and part-time work is a way to sort of spread your cash flow and the payments. Taking a gap year before you start earning some money in that is also a constructive way to build up a bit of a sum of money. And obvious things like living with relatives to reduce your overheads, to minimize the amount of work you might need to do alongside the course. And if you want to become a BPP Campus Ambassador, just contact us at lawoutreach@bpp.com, and we have scholarships for any students who want to represent their university who might be a first or second year at the moment looking to build up a bursary or a scholarship fund. So lots of ways to finance the course. We do lots of separate sessions on funding, so do please come to us. There are also some really important links in the slides here. All full-time applicants for any course need to apply to the Central Applications Board, whichever provider you're going to. If you want to know more about our events, there's this QR code you can tap into, and any more information about BPP you can click on, or you can scan that QR code there. And just to remind you, as I said earlier, I run a YouTube channel called SQE TV, runs lots of stuff, giving really useful advice on all things SQE. And I would, of course, recommend thoroughly you engage with LawCareersNet for the fantastic resources they got on their platform to help support you on your journey. So there we are. It took a little bit longer than I had hoped there, but we've got a few minutes just to deal with some questions there, Neve. So any questions that jump out at you that we feel we ought to study? Because I think quite a few of these looking down there I did end up covering.
Yeah, no problem. We've gone through the pass rate. Oh wow, we've had so many questions.
I've got one here. If you competed LLB in 2020, which route to take, LPC or SQE? You are able to take the SQE if you completed your law degree in 2020. However, I would strongly recommend that you take the SQE route, because the chances of you getting an LPC training contract are very small unless you've got one already, and therefore you'll probably still have to cross-qualify through the SQE route by doing SQE2 anyway, which will be more expensive and take you longer. That's the question at 1631. Anything else jumping out at you, Neve?
We had a question about would the SQE pathway be viable for someone who studied law abroad?
Right, if you are, you have to have really studied English law at either an LLB English law level or done a graduate conversion course. If you've got a law degree in a foreign jurisdiction, you're going to have to get up to speed with English law. So certainly at BPP, we treat you as a non-law graduate, even though you might have some experience of common law jurisdictions. So in most cases, if you're not a qualified lawyer, we recommend you do a conversion course. If you're a qualified lawyer, there are other ways that you can get through, and the SRA would advise you on their website if you are a qualified lawyer.
Okay, we've only got about 30 seconds until we strike 5, so I think that is all the time that we have for questions. But I do want to reassure everyone that is here today that we have got on LawCareersNet, we have an SQE hub, and there is a page called SQE Frequently Asked Questions. So hopefully that will answer quite a lot of your questions. And obviously Johnny has also put his the BPP email up on the board, so I'm sure that you can contact BPP with further questions too. Just to round off, I am so sorry that is all the time that we have, but as I said at the beginning, BPP will be back with another masterclass on the SQE. We have a great relationship with them, so we will hear from them many more times. I just want to thank you all for coming today. I want to thank Johnny for running this masterclass. I know I've learned a lot. Also, just a reminder to you all here today, so once this masterclass closes, a survey will be popping up, so please fill in that feedback. Let myself, let Johnny know what you enjoyed today, because it's really lovely to pass back on some of the feedback that you give. And make sure that you are registering for the next masterclasses. So links to both the next BPP masterclass, which is on the SQE and social mobility, and our practice area masterclass on energy will be in the follow-up link. The email normally comes out about 24 hours after the masterclass is closed. It will also contain a recording to today's session. Again, SQE Hub for anything that you might need. Johnny, thank you so much. This has been
fantastic. You, everyone. It is a challenging thing going through the SQE journey, but we can help you get through. LCN can help you get through it, and look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon.